Hello students, welcome back to the biology class. So in the last class we started the first chapter from the biology book, that is the living world, and we learned that there are certain characteristics which we use to define or to categorize living beings from the non-living beings. We learned in the last class that life is defined as a unique combination of various molecules, and we learned that these molecules undergo interaction and certain chemical reactions, and because of all these metabolic chemical reactions the life is there, because various processes are going on in the living body which help us to call us as a living organism, and we are distinguishable from the non-living organisms. We learned in the last class that the living organisms are characterized with certain features. For example, metabolism, which includes the catabolic as well as the anabolic reactions. Another characteristic of the living organism is the growth and development, and it can be the intrinsic growth or it could be the extrinsic growth. And another characteristic of living organism which we learned in the last class was the reproduction, whether it is a sexual method of reproduction in which a single parent is involved or two parents are involved, or whether it is the concept of reproducing a number of times in the life or just once in the life. And apart from that, even the cellular organization, we all know cells join to form tissues, tissues into organs, and organ system and organism. So all these are the characteristic of living organism. Apart from that, we also learned in the last class that living organism have a special quality, and that is to receive the signal or a stimulus and perform a particular response against it, which is called as the responsiveness. This is a characteristic of living organism. We also learned that obtaining nutrients, that means the concept of autotrophic nutrition, heterotrophic nutritions, are also the characteristic of living organisms. We learned that respiration is performed by living organism, movements of various types, and if it is a plant, just the movement or motion. But if it is a living organism like animals, in that case we will have even locomotions possible, which is important for search for food, search for shelter, search for drinking water, as well as for the mate or sexual partner. We also learned that the living organisms perform excretion. They try to maintain homeostasis inside, which is the constant internal environment. And we also learned that there are adaptations which are short-term and long-term adaptations which are possible in the living organism. And apart from that, aging, death, and lifespan. These are some of the most important characteristics of the living organism. So we learned that there is a huge diversity of living organisms around us, and this diversity is estimated to be 1.7 to 1.8 million species have been studied and provided name. And we learned that the list of organisms include 1.2 million animals and 0.5 million plant species. It is estimated that somewhere around 5 to 30 million species are there. That means a large number of still are there which we have not discovered, and they have not been named and identified, and the chances are we are losing them. The reason is the climate change, the reason is the habitat loss, etc. So we learned in the last class, because there is a huge diversity and short time in our hand, that's why a very important way of studying these living organisms is to do the concept of classification. So we learned that there is something called as taxonomy, which is slightly different from the systematics. We learned in the last class that taxonomy is the branch of biology which deals with framing rules and regulation, framing the criteria, etc. for identification and classification of organism, naming of the organism. And when such rules and principles are utilized in actuality, we call that branch of applied biology as systematics. So systematics is a bigger concept because it uses the rules and regulations which are set by taxonomy. So taxonomy only frames taxonomy is the branch which frames these rules, and these rules are applied in systematics. We learned in the last class that why do we need taxonomy is that it makes the identification of organisms and their study very much convenient. The study of the few representatives from each group enables us to have a broad idea of the lifespan of the whole group. It also reveals relationship among the various groups of organisms. It enables to interpret the poorly visible structures of the fossil organisms. And fifth point, it helps us to understand the evolutionary trends in the various groups of organisms. So these are the basic points for which we need the classification. We can say classification help us to make our study convenient. It helps us to give us the idea of how organisms have adapted. It helps us to get the idea regarding the course of evolution and even the evolutionary relationship with various organisms, the past organism and the present organism, and even to discover the new organism. Taxonomy plays an important role. And in the last class we learned that in taxonomy 3 main things are there, and that is the identification, nomenclature and classification.